Welcome. In this video, we are going to talk about Oracle Active Data Guard, FarSync, and Axxana. So let's first talk about what FarSync is. So here we have the primary data center with an Exadata. And the DR site with the secondary disaster recovery standby Exadata. In a regular async scenario, you would see the WAN spanning from the primary to the DR site, and you would lose data. FarSync from Oracle will allow you, in most cases, and with an emphasis on most cases, to achieve zero data loss at any distance, with some conditions and a lot of money involved. And let me explain. So what FarSync is not a full database instance. You can look at it as a pass-through. FarSync utilizes synchronous replication from the primary data center to another facility. Let's call it the FarSync facility. And from the over-synchronous replication, so you have to have fiber lines of communication, which are very costly. You have to have very short distances, and we'll talk about why that is a challenge. And the FarSync instance will then replicate asynchronously to a remote site, in our case 1,000 miles away, to the standby database. So why is that zero data loss at any distance? Because if the primary data center had a failure, and the FarSync is indeed synchronous, it will be current. It will be without any data loss. And assuming it is in a 25 miles away, still very extremely costly topology. But the data is here, and then the remote data center would draw the data from the FarSync instance to the missing data, or the last mile of the data that would have been lost in a regular asynchronous scenario, draw it to the standby data center and database, and you would get zero data loss effectively over any distance. But what are the challenges? What is the problem with this scenario? So you have to have a third data center, which is extremely costly. You have to have a fiber line between the data centers, which is again extremely costly. And you're dependent on that line. If there is a slight delay, a slight hiccup on that line, and then you have a disaster, then this FarSync instance is not zero data loss anymore. Then this whole scenario turns to be a regular data loss asynchronous replication scenario. So you're dependent on the line, on a line cut, on a line delay. And another scenario that is very risky, which renders this whole costly, complicated, ineffective scenario useless, is if you had a regional disaster. So what if you had a regional disaster which would kill everything at the same time? Then you don't have the FarSync instance. Then you have asynchronous replication. So while FarSync is an amazing tool if everything goes right and the only thing that you lose is the primary data center, it has its disadvantages. But what if you took the Axxana black box and what if you installed the FarSync software instead of another data center? Let's forget that scenarios. Let's forget that topology. What if you do not have a FarSync site? What if you installed the FarSync from Oracle, the same software, the same product, you installed it inside the Axxana compute, the Axxana black box, which is essentially a server. It is a hardened, disaster-proof server with tons of storage in it. So if you installed FarSync here, then you don't need a third data center, because the FarSync instance now inside the black box would survive the disaster. That computer would survive a disaster. That server would not. So you don't have a third data center. You absolutely do not have a waste of money. You do not have fiber lines because this is inside the same data center. You are not dependent on the line, and there is no regional disaster. Or even if there is a regional disaster, you do not care about it because you never lose that box. This box is hardened and will survive any disaster, regional or non-regional. So now the FarSync instance, as usual, will be talking to the Exadata in the primary while the primary is gone. The primary here is gone. But the black box has a battery. It is not dependent on its surrounding. The black box has wireless communication. The black box is protected by VPN, your own VPN. And the FarSync flows basically from the black box to the Exadata. And you achieve the same zero data loss. And now you really achieve zero data loss across unlimited distances with Oracle's FarSync product sitting inside the Axxana black box. No third data center, no fiber lines, no dependency on the line, and full protection against regional disasters. Thank you.